Good Yontif.
Good Yontif.
There were intense conversations in our home the day before our trip to Israel this past July. I'd hoped to spend a few weeks studying at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem with some of the best progressive teachers of our generation. We were also eager to celebrate a family wedding in Tel Aviv. Marita's cousin, Alex, was marrying the most amazing woman, Jessica, and they had asked me to officiate their wedding. Most airlines had canceled flights to Ben Gurion because Israel was at war in Gaza. There were rockets raining down from Hezbollah, and there was unpredictable violence inside the country itself. Understandably, family and friends were concerned about our plans, but we assured them that things seemed safe enough and that we would take every precaution. We recognized that this Israel that we were traveling to wasn't the vibrant, bustling place of previous visits. Instead, it was a country where men and women were serving in active war zones, where 20% of the population were evacuees in their own borders, and where the looming threat of escalation affected every social interaction. Marita and I had traveled to Israel just a few months earlier, so the memories of picking fruit on the southern border alongside hundreds of other volunteers from around the country as the ground shook from artillery blasts, and the heavy pall that hung over every conversation were still very much on our minds. So too was the resilience of the Israeli people, their incredible coming together in the face of existential danger, and the love that we felt for every one of them. I remember handing out stacks of cards drawn by our Temple Emanu-El Sunday school kids to IDF soldiers at the repopulated army base on the Gaza border, a base that had been overrun by Hamas on October 7th. Bullet holes pocked the walls everywhere. Our letters thanked the soldiers for being heroes, assuring them that they were loved and expressing prayers for their safety. As Marita and I read messages out loud, translating as we went, many of the soldiers, these tough men and women, some of them mothers and fathers themselves, they teared up. The words of solidarity and of peoplehood from their cousins across the ocean meant everything to them, especially in the face of the isolation that Israel has experienced this past brutal year. Through a family friend, we were able to meet with a survivor at Kibbutz Be'eri. We were very clear with ourselves that we were not there for any reason but to report back the reality that we saw, especially in the face of the Orwellian messages that much of the world professes in the media and on college campuses. They who twist terrorist into freedom fighter, marauder into martyr, and a Hamas pogrom that tortured, abused, and murdered 1,200 Israelis, an act that can only be described as pure evil, into something that they claim should be globalized. Kibbutz Be'eri suffered a slaughter of more than 100 people, and dozens more were dragged into Gaza to be used as pawns. The young man who walked us around made it very clear that this was not a tour, and he wasn't a tour guide. We let him know that we understood and shared with him that we were there solely to bear witness and to share the truth of what had happened, because already there were so many who deny that it happened at all. He walked us through that nightmarish morning of how Hamas broke through the fence while families slept and went house to house committing horrors. As he led us into living rooms with blood still staining the walls, we stepped over broken glass. It was everywhere. The few houses that were untouched were the ones where other atrocities had happened to mothers and daughters. Each step felt overwhelming. We walked through the remains of the kibbutz kindergarten and its clinic, all the while feeling the ghost of our people who were so recently alive, their breath snatched from them, communities shattered. This past summer, our conversations about whether we return to Israel for the family wedding and the study in Jerusalem were shaped by the violence that had occurred, the ongoing war, and the threat of more to come. And while we live in relative safety, this past year for Jews in America has been incredibly hard. Much of what we once took for granted as part of our reality has been shaken, maybe even broken. Just as the Israelis assumed that their high-tech borders would keep them safe, Jews in America had assumed that generations of assimilation had allowed us to blend in and no longer stand out. Just as the Israelis believed that their government, military, and intelligence would protect them from radical jihadists, American Jews believed that our contributions in academia, industry, and social justice reform would shield us from the unwanted attention of the woke mob in this country. Yes, we knew that there were people and groups who really didn't like us, but we misjudged them as a wackadoo, marginalized bunch who were not really a threat. They could be ignored. Clearly, nothing could be further from the truth. The world that was formed in the aftermath of October 7th made the anti-Semitism feel very personal. We experienced it in our schools, on our social media feeds, at work, and through our daily interactions. Often there was no reciprocity for our past good deeds or our continued good intentions. In fact, the only response we received from so many groups we believed were our allies, having stood by them in their time of need, was betrayal. How does one express the sadness and the rage that we feel at this moment in time? That our dream of being unexceptional, just another people amongst peoples, is still just a dream. The very ideology that fiercely protects other minorities demands that Jews renounce our values and culture or risk being treated as pariahs. They would return us to a time without Jewish self-determination, a world without Israel, where once again we would be subject to the whim of others. We've lived like that. For 2,000 years, we lived like that. And we know it doesn't end well. As I sat in the Jerusalem Beit Midrash this summer with 200 rabbis from around the world, one central question framed our wrestling. Post-October 7th, who are the Jewish people? And could our study reveal wisdom from our long history, from our traditions, that might help us cope with this moment in time? Was there Torah that might guide us and empower us to weather the storm? For as any student of Jewish history knows, we've been here before. In our thousands of years, the Jewish civilization has experienced upheavals, and we've managed to recover and to thrive once again many, many times. Let's start with our origin story, the one we celebrate each year at Passover. The religion of ancient Egypt, with their pyramids as monuments to the afterlife, glorified death as the ultimate goal. According to our story, it's from this place that God liberated us from slavery and gave us a radical new perspective of the world where life, not death, is called holy. Today on Yom Kippur, the Amidah calls out, "Remember us for life, sovereign God who treasures life. Inscribe us in the book of life for your name's sake, God of life." No one promised that this vision of what could be, or the Judaism that would take us there, would be easy. Clearly, it is not. There are competing systems, whether from tyrants or misguided ideologies, that come and go. But we remember, we do our best to contribute, and we endure. One of the lessons from Torah carries with it a wisdom that Jews have preserved throughout the ages. In times of great need, we raise it up again. When Moses realizes that the journey to the land of Israel must continue without him and the rest of his generation, he imparts these words to his successor, Joshua, "Chazak ve'amatz," which translates as, "Be strong and have courage." In a private moment with Joshua, God confers his leadership, not just over a people who are in transition between where they're coming from and where they're ultimately going, but over a people committed to a radical new way of living and shaping the world. Here, God gives Joshua the same charge, "Chazak ve'amatz," be strong and have courage. Soon after, our ancestors are told they must move forward without Moses. After 40 years in the desert wilderness, they'll have to rely on one another, on their faith and on their purpose. They too are told, "Hamatz, Chazak ve'amatz," collectively be strong and have courage. And finally, after they cross the River Jordan into the Promised Land, Joshua is feeling unsure about himself and has doubts about how to proceed. Torah tells us it was then that the people, having internalized the message, echo back to Joshua as one, "Chazak ve'amatz," be strong and have courage. Who are we, the Jews, after October 7th? We're a people who have shed our illusion of unconditional acceptance in universities, business, and social movements. There was a time in America when we decided that if we weren't going to be accepted, then we would create our own spaces. It may be time for us to do this again. But we also have become a people who recognize allyship from those who extend their hands when it counts most. There are many good people in this country and around the world who recognize that we and Israel are on the front lines of a war with enemies who would wage it against us all. We are a people who now seek genuine partners, those who stand with us and speak through their actions as we build bridges together. We are a people who desperately want peace with nations and with neighbors, but not at any price. If that means that we won't win popularity contests because we refuse to be scared or silenced, then so be it. We have become a people who will be there for one another, even when we're exhausted. For October 7th has, more than ever, forged us into a we. We Jews hate war. But October 7th has reminded us that we have to defend ourselves. It's a moral imperative. When Iran and its proxies seek to destroy us in our population centers and call for global jihad against Jews around the world, we have to use whatever power we have to respond to our tormentors. Most Israelis believe this is an existential struggle, as vital as the fight for independence. We are distraught by the death of innocent civilians caught up in this terrible war waged by Hamas and Hezbollah from people's homes, hospitals, and schools. I believe that we're doing our best to protect the innocent wherever they are, with the sober knowledge that war is awful. And I pray for a time when there's a different possibility, when wounds can heal, and we can see one another's humanity. This year, the mantra of Jews everywhere has become, "We will dance again." It refers to the tragedy at the Nova Festival, which was full of young people there to celebrate life and to dance. The metaphor of dance is the antidote to despair, where we are the ones who are reaching high, our eyes towards the heavens, and stretching low to spin and pivot, harnessing our internal energy, lifting and leaping together, expressing our love for one another, for our people, and for how life can and must be lived. Some of us will recommit to living Jewishly with joy, maybe even exuberance, doing mitzvot, lighting Shabbat candles, coming to synagogue, celebrating Simchat Torah, hugging our children, supporting Jewish institutions. These have all now become not only acts of connection, but of defiance. This summer, we gathered for Alex and Jessica's wedding under a gorgeous chuppah overlooking the port of Tel Aviv. Surrounded by family and friends from Germany, America, and Israel, together we celebrated the love of a bride and a groom. We were all there as a proclamation of a deep-rooted and desperately shared hope. The bride circling her groom gave expression for the vision that tomorrow will be better than today, and that the Jewish home will be one of beauty, family, and safety. As they held the Kiddush cup high, our voices carried the ancient promise from days of old that in the future, Children will bless the streets of Jerusalem and Zion, a sign of a land and a region at peace. Its fathers and mothers' home, a time where there is war no more. And as the groom broke the glass to the raucous applause of Mazel Tov, we reminded ourselves that once our temple was destroyed, but that we continued to live, love, and laugh as Jews until we were able to return again. I think that this is what Moses and Joshua and the Israelites of old meant when they said to one another again and again, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and have courage. We say it to each other until we believe it and become it. We say these words on this Yom Kippur day to one another, and they echo to us from past generations, from Israel to Atlanta and back again. We call to one another from soul to soul, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong, be strong. And through one another, we will have courage. And we pray that one day soon, we will have a true and lasting peace. Good Yom Tov.